Good evening once again, everybody. Hell's Unicorn here. I just got one of the strongest feelings of deja vu that I think I've ever had in my life today, as I followed the Sunday talk shows and everything else on the network news concerning the Ames Straw Poll results. When I first read about the results, I was actually not at home. I was away at a friend's house. And late Saturday evening, I actually read the results online via Ron Paul's 2012 website. So I got a complete, full disclosure of the results, and I was ecstatic. But I was ecstatic with a strong foot grounded in reality, because I pretty well knew that this was going to happen. The media has hyped their chosen white horse of the moment, Michelle Bachmann, and are continuing to hype Bush version 2.0, aka Mr. Fanatical Methodist Mystic Rick Perry, as the lead attraction, and Mitt Romney taking a back seat because he is not a participant in all things Iowa, so to speak. It's aggravating for a couple of reasons, not the least of which being that the spread between the votes in the actual straw poll was just over 150 votes. It was less than a percentage point. That is what you call a statistical dead heat. And the spread between third and fourth place was rather massive. We're talking half as much in the case of Palente, and then Santorum and the others are down closer to single digits. What does that tell all of you? What it tells me is that the media, as always, has a problem with liberty. I've known this for the better part of 4 years. I've always known this for as long as I've been on YouTube, because I've always seen it. And I'm sure everybody watching this video has seen it. The problem that we have is that, like it or not, the ideas that we're supporting are not mainstream. They were closer to being mainstream 150, 200 years ago, but they're not mainstream now. There are two things that people want to hear right now. They want to hear that they're going to get more stuff, and they want to hear that we're going to stick it to whoever wants to get in the way. And for now, the fictional enemy is people in the Middle East. After that lie gets worn out enough, we'll move on to some new enemy. That's usually the best way to keep people distracted. I've come to the opinion that people need some kind of realistic entertainment of a more barbaric variety, and I think that's the primary focus of all these wars. It's not a question of victory or of defense. It's a question of amusement. There is no victory to be had in any of these wars. There is no point whatsoever for us staying in Afghanistan for another year or for another minute. It is insignificant, the difference between the standpoint of the quote-unquote new left, who hates war but does it anyway, just because, and the neocons, aka the Fox Tea Party, who are amused at war and make no secret of it. But since we're in the business of creating fictional frontrunners in order to make it a reality, which is what the media excels at. That's why I call them magi. They're not interested in conveying truth. They're interested in using magic tricks in order to make a different truth believable. Let's size up these two supposed frontrunners. Who here that wishes to speak on the matter has anything good to say about Rick Perry? Mr. I'm going to displace thousands of farmers to ramrod a NAFTA superhighway through Texas. Mr. A few years back I got my mansion burned down because I pissed off a good number of my constituents, and one of them maybe crossed the line a little bit. Mr. I love military interventionism. When it comes to war, especially of the undeclared and unending variety that we have now, Rick Perry is a true believer and a true addict. War in the Middle East is his smack, and he injects it daily. If you doubt this, take a look at some of the fanatical idiots that he goes to for spiritual guidance. And then Michelle Bachmann, the epitome of hypocrisy. Deep down, I am convinced, after seeing what I've seen and reading what I've read, that Michelle Bachmann is, at heart, a neoconservative. The foreign policy fits, with the exception of Libya, which I think is a token contrarian viewpoint, which Hannity and Limbaugh have picked up on, simply because it's Obama's war. The other two are Bush's war, so they're a little bit more forgivable. And she supports that damn Patriot Act. I'm going to just tell all of you something right now. The Patriot Act is a deal breaker. And it's not a deal breaker because I hate George W. Bush and he created it and his idiotic neocon friends came up with it. No. The Patriot Act is disturbing because it is a direct assault on habeas corpus, on the right of every person in this country to be secure in their persons and in their property. If you don't have a Fourth Amendment, you don't have a free country. The Fourth Amendment is more pivotal and more consequential than even the First Amendment as far as I'm concerned. The First Amendment is meaningless if the government can kick down your door whenever it wants to, or if it can go through your personal information at any time for any caprice without due process via the judicial system. It is an affront to the very concept of limited government with checks and balances. We don't have checks and balances on our government just for the fun of it. We have it to prevent nonsense like what's going on right now. We have it because an inherent aspect of human nature is that the more power one amasses, the more corrupt he becomes. The king is not evil. It's his throne and the power that it represents that is evil, and by it all who occupy it become evil. It's not the king. It's the kingdom. This is something that people have to wrap their heads around. And when I talk to the average rank and file Michelle Bachmann supporter, and I have actually spoken to many, this flies clean over their head. They carry around little pocket constitutions as a nice little gimmick, but when you challenge them on the actual ramifications of each one of those individual rights and you measure it against her stances, it's like you're from a different planet speaking some dialect of Martian to them. They don't understand it because they don't want to understand it. I'm going to conclude this little talk here with regards to the problems with these two candidates and with mainstream media coverage of Ron Paul by going into preacher mode here. Something which I don't do much on this channel. This is something I reserve for my John the Jansenist channel. The kind of supporters that Michelle Bachmann has are likened to idolaters. This isn't a matter of good sense or a matter of good faith. This is a matter of a great totem that has been constructed based on a lie. The same wood that this totem has been built out of is the wood that people use to heat the flues of their fireplaces and to cook their meat. Let me ask you something. What makes that idol so special if it's made out of things that you use for such meager tasks as firewood and as kindling? What mystique has been placed upon this lie simply because we've put a pretty exterior on it through whittling and carving, just as we've whittled away and carved away all of the disgusting aspects of this person's ideology, and we've only focused on the good parts of it. Oh, look at the pretty tax cuts, and look at the token vote against the debt ceiling. It never enters into our mind that this could be an act of opportunism, such as the opportunism which Bachman displayed when she threw her church of 10 years under the bus. Let me ask all of you something. What kind of person claims to be a lover of all things holy if they can just drop their church in the name of furthering a political career? What does it say for that person's principles? People like to complain about Bachman's religious credentials and how she has all of these out-of-whack stances. I question whether the woman believes in God, considering what she has done here. If a person loves God, then by every good standard one would have a much better reason for leaving a church than the fact that they're going to campaign in a state that is heavily Roman Catholic. Stand by your principles. If you think that the papacy is founded on illegitimate authority, then what does that say about you? If you're going to jump up and say it's an okay thing, if it's going to advance you in your chosen career and in the standing of the public persona. Or what does it say about you? What does it say about your love of God if you take absolutely no time to understand the doctrines which your church teaches and preaches? This is something that should be taken into account. When a churchgoer claims ignorance of the most basic and essential doctrines on which that church is founded on, do you think Martin Luther just founded that church on the notion that it was a cool thing to do? It was exercising his free will and being independent. Martin Luther didn't believe in this notion of free will that you think of. He wrote a very, very telling book called On the Bondage of the Will in response to Erasmus's claim that mankind can bring something to the table with regards to their own salvation. If Martin Luther were alive today, she would spit in Michelle Bachmann's face. Not because she left his church, the church he created, and the doctrines that it espouses, but because of the reasons by which she did it. So all of you who like to preach the good word, I want you to take this into account. I want every single Christian who is subscribed to my channel to think about this. What does it say about a person who claims to love God when she puts her own political career ahead of the interests of a church that she's belonged to for 10 years? It's either a lack of judgment on her choice of church, which I highly doubt, or it's a matter of not thy will, but mine be done, in the case of Michelle Bachmann. It's definitely something to think about. And for those of you not theologically inclined, I can't help but concede the point that Michelle Bachmann gave you yet another reason to rail against religion. Here's an open, bold-faced case of hypocrisy. A person who probably, in your estimation, probably doesn't believe a word they're saying, and you might be right on that account. For people like me, it's just one more reason to feel alone even amongst other Christians. For you, it's a validation of what you've always thought about people like Bachman. I don't think I'm really in much of a position to convince you otherwise, because there's too many cases out there validating your view on this matter. But regardless to what view you take on this, I think it's safe to say that Michelle Bachman is bad medicine. And indeed, what good is any cure if in the process of curing the disease you also kill the patient? From my end, the cure is simple. Vote Ron Paul. With prudence to myself and benevolence to all of you, good evening.